Welcome back to One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Keenan. I'm joined by our own Colin Loughran, and then a very special guest today, Dan DeUva, radio broadcaster for the Vegas Golden Knights hockey team out in Vegas, out in the desert, doing a little bit better than the Desert Dogs, that is the Arizona Coyotes. Dan, we'll start with you. How are you, sir?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me.
And then Colin, how are you, my man? You're a big hockey guy.
I'm doing great, Keenan. You know I love hockey, love watching all those games, especially the locals, Rangers, Islanders. Certainly some interesting storylines there this year. Excited to be here.
So, Dan, we'll just hop right into it. You've been with Vegas since their inaugural season in the NHL. I got to ask, when you got that gig, were you expecting the immediate success that they've had? Because, yeah, we can look back at their cup run and say they were one step away. But every season since then, they've been on par with every team in the West, leading the Pacific currently. Were you expecting this immediate impact from when you got out there? And what's that story been like for you to follow of just good games night after night after night after night?
No, the expectation here was there were no expectations internally and in the market. Around the National Hockey League, the presumption was, like every other expansion team that had come before, they'd be terrible. They would be in last place. They wouldn't make the playoffs. One critique of the Golden Knights going into the first season is that they were weak down the middle. And then William Karlsson goes and scores 43 goals, and his line is dubbed the Misfits. And instead of trading away their better players at the trade deadline and acquiring draft picks to make the team better down the line, they turned out to be the best team in hockey before New Year's. And they beat Tampa Bay in a terrific game in late December. And they rode that to a division championship, despite Drew Doughty's comments that there's no way that Vegas is going to be better than us, the Kings, by season's end. And what do you know? Vegas swept the Kings in the first round of the playoffs. And then you get to San Jose in the second round. And if you get to the Final Four, which they did against Winnipeg, it's pretty much a successful season, regardless if you're in an inaugural season or in your 100th. But they got there and they won and then lost in the Cup final against Washington. We didn't expect that, no, but I think that the people here were just thinking about bringing in a new market into the world of hockey. And that's what they did. And I think that since then, the idea has been to raise the bar, so much so that if they don't get back to the Stanley Cup final year in and year out, it's a disappointment.
Dan, staying on the topic of the Golden Knights, I was wondering if you could give some thoughts on how they played this season, currently 50 points, top of the Pacific. Thinking about the players that really form this roster, incredible group of guys in my estimation. Mark Stone, Jack Eichel coming up the pike soon, hopefully. But what is your assessment of this hockey club?
The assessment is incomplete because they've not yet had their entire roster for a single game. And it's more than Jack Eichel. Well, Jack, having been acquired from Buffalo a few months ago, his Golden Knights debut could be within the next month. One of the players they used in that trade was Alex Tuch. Well, he didn't play any games because he was injured. Max Pacioretty has 12 goals, but he's only played in 16 games. William Karlsson has only played in, I think, now 26 games out of 41. Like, there are a number of guys with injury. Max Pacioretty has had two totally different injuries. Then you throw in the number of guys who've missed games here or there because of COVID protocol. Everybody's enduring that. But if you sort of take the COVID protocol out of it, the Golden Knights, just in terms of man games lost, most in the National Hockey League, second only to the Montreal Canadiens. But that includes, someone like Shea Weber, whose career is over, but he's still technically on the team. In other words, the Golden Knights have not come close to having their full team. The misfit line I mentioned earlier is still intact. Jonathan Marchessault, William Karlsson, Riley Smith. And then you throw in Max Pacioretty and Mark Stone as two of the great players of their generation. And then you throw Jack Eichel, who's a top three player, into the mix. Watch out for Chandler Stevenson, though. Another one of those guys I referred to weak down the middle going into year one. He was a pickup from Washington. He was on the team to beat Vegas in the finals. And he's been a revelation. He leads the Golden Knights in scoring right now. He's only missed one game, which is an accomplishment in itself. And they've got a little bit different vibe on the depth side of things. And then on the blue line, they're one of the most productive blue lines in the NHL. Alex Pietrangelo is the top 5, maybe top 3 defenseman. Shea Theodore had a 3-point game on Thursday night, and he has been so impressive. They are a deep team. The only question will be, can they get everybody to stay on the roster and stay under the salary cap when Jack Eichel and Max Pacioretty return from their injuries?
I do have a question for you, Dan. And, I'm from the Chicagoland area, so I grew up listening to Edzo and Pat Foley on the call. Everyone that watches hockey obviously knows Doc Emmerich. Remember when I was a kid, I watched a Pittsburgh Penguins documentary about, Sid getting drafted, and you hear all these calls by Mike Lang, the great Mike Lang out in Pittsburgh. I was just wondering, do you take any styles from those guys calling hockey? Because hockey is truly a unique broadcast where it's just nonstop action. You always got to keep the listener, no matter if it's on the radio or on the television, you've got to really communicate what's going on the ice, because, if you haven't played hockey growing up and might not totally understand what's going on in terms of rules, in terms of, positioning on the ice. So I'm just wondering, for your calling style, do you take anything from some of the game's greats, or do you just completely make it your own?
I grew up in New Jersey and first tried broadcasting hockey when I was about 14 years old for my high school's hockey team. But before I did that, would go to New Jersey Devils games with a micro cassette tape recorder and practice, and then stalk the Devils broadcasters, Mike Emmerich, Chico Resch on TV, and on the radio, Mike Miller and Randy Belichick, and sort of ask for their tips and advice, and soaked in as much hockey as I could. And growing up in the New York area, sure, there was Doc, but Sam Rosen and Marv Albert and then Kenny Albert and Howie Rose with the Islanders. You could go down the list of terrific broadcasters, and just in the hockey world in the New York area. So you think, I'm sure I'm some sort of amalgamation of those people who I listened to growing up. But Marv Albert put out a book in the 70s called Yes, of course. And in the book, he talks about how hard of a listen hockey is on the radio. It's not like baseball. It's not like basketball where there's a certain rhythm that you can anticipate. Even football, it's kind of rhythmic in how there's a play, and then there's 30 seconds of nothing, and you talk about what just happened and preview what's next. Hockey is totally unpredictable. So there's a great deal of efficiency required, but also anticipating what might happen next. So you don't want to get caught. You don't want to fall behind the play, but you also can't get stuck in what's happening. I say that there's 100 things going on during any given moment on the ice. I can see like 12, but I can only describe 1 or 2. And the judgment is which 1 or 2 things, and where do my eyes go to see which 12 things I need to see. So that is the challenge. I think that if you were to ask somebody, does Dan have an announcer who he sounds like? I hope the answer is no. But because I'm a sports fan in general and have broadcast so many different sports, I had someone tell me I sounded like an NBA announcer, not in style, but in voice, which is fine. So I have learned a lot of lessons from those people, and Mike Emmerich in particular, having been a WFUV credentialed reporter for the Devils, and being around Doc in those days when he was still the Devils announcer, and then working for the Devils organization with one of their minor league teams, you can't help but be immersed in the hockey broadcasting style of Mike Emmerich. But it's more than just the style. It's the conduct. It's the degree to which he prepares. It's how he treats other people. So I think that if somebody tunes into the broadcast and they hear one thing, if they say one thing about listening to me, it would be that you can't wipe the smile off his face. You can hear the smile in his voice. And while that is very much the case, I think that really crystallized in my brain because of how Mike Emmerich approaches what he does.
As a broadcaster, has there been a particular moment that struck you? Like a moment that you watched on the ice that really captivated your attention?
Yes, but it will surprise you entirely. The moment I think that I knew this was going to be meaningful for me was a high school hockey game in 2000, where my high school, the Ridgewood Maroons in Bergen County, New Jersey, ended up as the 8th seed in the state tournament and went to Montclair as a heavy underdog and laughed out of the building by the Montclair Mounties fans, who were ranked 3rd in the state. And Ridgewood won on a shorthanded goal in overtime by Chris Jascott. And that sent Ridgewood to the quarterfinals and then ultimately the semifinals. But it was a special moment because, as I recall, Cablevision couldn't, the cameraman who was assigned to shoot that game couldn't find the arena in Montclair for some reason. But our broadcast was available and was on television, and people wanted copies of the tape. And it was such an incredible game. It was one of those legendary things where the goalie first had 28 saves, then the next day he had 42, and a week later he had 73. And it was one of those great moments that I always think about because it was so special. You realize the power of a broadcast. And I still think of myself as a baseball person doing hockey, but I have had those hockey roots. Devils won the cup my freshman year of high school, my senior year of high school. And all of that put together, I think, makes me such a great fan of the game. And I like to share that with people. So, yes, there are lots of moments watching the Devils growing up, watching the NHL growing up. But in those formative years, when you're 14, 15 years old, and you're broadcasting your high school's hockey games, and it was just such a great season. I have so many great memories. But that particular moment, and to call that goal, it's still one of my favorite moments on the air, off the air, watching the game in any way, shape, or form. I sadly did not have too many moments on the ice myself. so doing the play-by-play of something like that will stick with me. Right up there, believe it or not, and I'm not kidding. It's right up there with doing the Stanley Cup Finals.
And Dan, my final question for you today is, I think the biggest concern within the NHL was, would Vegas be a location in which they'd have a consistent fan base, a loyal fan base, whatever? It wouldn't just be like a nighttime show. You'd have people invested. I think the biggest testimony to that was this season when Marc-Andre Fleury came back with the Blackhawks. They had that touching tribute to him and, a standing ovation within the crowd and everybody really embracing Marc-Andre for what he brought to Vegas. My question to you related to that is just how have you felt the hockey community grow in Vegas since the Golden Knights arrived? Your relationship with that growth, either with the fans, or are you becoming a local celebrity in a little sense? Or how do you also just embrace that in terms of your broadcast that, now it's picking up more? So maybe you need to be a little bit more precise, or, you have to be a little bit more detailed, or whatever that may encapsulate, just as it might be growing out in the desert.
Very popular with the Uber drivers and the taxi drivers. Who are up and down the strip, and what do they do when the Golden Knights are playing? They turn on the radio. People want to know what's going on, and it will be funny because I'll get in the car. Some people won't know who I am, but then they'll hear my voice and do I know you? You sound familiar, which is enjoyable. But I haven't changed anything that I've done. I came in here along with Dave Gosher, one of our other broadcasters, and Dave had been with the Bruins for 17, 18 years and broadcast their Stanley Cup championship in 2011, get the duck boats ready. I don't think that we changed our approach simply because Vegas hadn't had an NHL team before. We didn't dumb it down. I figured people here would learn hockey the way that I learned hockey, and that's simply by watching. Mike Emmerich was not giving me hockey 101 when I was a kid. I just learned by watching and playing and so on. But I think that so many people here are transplants. They're from another part of the country and they've made their way here. Plus, this is 2017. It's not 1947. People can watch hockey if they want to. They have the internet here, right? It might be a far-flung distance from major hockey markets, but people have had minor league hockey here, the Las Vegas Thunder, the Las Vegas Wranglers, and so on and so on. So we didn't need to change anything in that respect. But the people here love the Golden Knights because it was the first major league franchise of the four major sports to call Vegas home. And it was critical not to have relocated from another city, but they were born here. They make a big marketing push about being Vegas born. Do people like the Raiders here? Yeah, sure. But it's not quite the same because the Raiders have their own history and so on. But the Golden Knights as an organization really wanted to invest in this community. And it's sad to say, but the tragedy and the horrific shooting on October 1st of 2017 in the throes of the Golden Knights launching the franchise, you think about in New York, September 11th, what the Yankees and the Mets meant to the city. And that feeling, that sense of community and a place to heal did not exist here prior to the Golden Knights, but they arrived just in time. And the Golden Knights were a focal rallying point for this community in the midst of that tragedy. And they hadn't played a regular season game yet. And then to have played that first game and Derek Anglin to give a speech on national television. He played minor league hockey in this market, had made his home here in the offseason. He delivers a speech, and "We are Vegas strong" was just incredible, electric. And then a defenseman who never scores, he goes out and scores one of those 4 goals that the team gets in the first period, and an incredible start. So that won over a lot of people. And then they kept on winning, and they've kept on winning here through the course of their 5 seasons. So it is a community that has absolutely fallen in love with the team. And all those anecdotes aside, the Golden Knights are number 1 in average attendance, 104% of capacity, and they were above that number even last night. So it'll probably go up. So just by tickets, fans in the seats, if that's the barometer in any sport, clearly Vegas is number 1.
Well, Dan, we really do appreciate you stopping in to chat with us. I love everything that's happening out in Vegas. Seattle just got introduced into that Pacific. Really happy to see hockey going to new places, just to continue expanding the sport, because I personally hope it has a big future in the United States. I grew up playing. I love it. We really do appreciate you stopping in. Wishing you all the best the rest of the way this season. Vegas currently sitting on top of the Pacific. Hopefully you can get back to that Cup Finals. And if you do, you bet me and Colin can be tuned in, even though we're out of market.
Oh, we appreciate that very much, and looking forward to getting back east here. And hopefully I wouldn't be too upset if it's Golden Knights and one of the New York teams in the Cup final.
Certainly wouldn't have any problem with either of us. Thank you so much, Dan. Take care.